the legal documents, deeds or evidence files, but it belonged there more than anything else. It was the reason behind all of it. Saturday morning arrived, the day of the anniversary party. Lily slept peacefully while I had been awake since 4. Sitting on the edge of my bunk in the dim blue-gray morning light, I reviewed the binder once more tab by tab. Court order, checked. Certified demand letter, checked. Trust deed, checked. Printed screenshots from the library, 4 per page, checked. Phone recording saved to a USB drive Priya lent me, checked. Reverse image search results, checked. Everything was organized like my lesson plans at school, dated and numbered. I had learned from teaching that if something isn't written down, it is easy for people to pretend it never happened. Priya stopped by at 7, even though she was off duty, because she would watch Lily later and take her to Evelyn's house before the party. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm terrified," I said. She leaned against the doorway and said, "Good. That means you care enough to do this right." I tried on my clothes in the shelter's shared bathroom. White blouse, black slacks and a dark blazer borrowed from Priya that was slightly too big. I wore no jewelry and only a little lipstick from the bottom of my purse. Looking in the mirror under the buzzing fluorescent light, I saw a woman standing in borrowed clothes inside a place that was not her home. I told myself that soon I would not hear that humming light anymore. Lily and I would live somewhere with real walls, our own door and a place we could lock from inside. But tonight still mattered. I put the binder in my bag, zipped it shut and returned to our room. Lily was sitting awake on the top bunk, Captain the stuffed bear in her lap. "Mommy, where are you going?" she asked. "To see some family, baby. Priya will take you to Grandma's house tonight for a sleepover." I had one truth to deliver. "Of course," I said, kissing her forehead. She smelled like coconut shampoo, the small comfort I refused to give up because I wanted my daughter to always carry something pleasant with her. I picked up my bag. My hands were shaking but my mind felt sharp and focused. In the afternoon, while I was braiding Lily's hair, a message arrived from my cousin Rachel. She warned me that my mother had been telling people at church that I had mental health problems and that she had been financially supporting me while I pushed her away. Some people were believing it and my uncle had spoken about it during Bible study. I read the message twice, feeling the familiar pattern of reputation being rewritten before I could speak. Then I set the phone down and continued braiding Lily's hair, because tonight I had one truth to deliver. I put my phone down and finished braiding Lily's hair. I wasn't surprised by what I read. This was my mother's usual strategy: get ahead of the story so people hear her version first. By the time I walked into the party, most of the guests would likely think I was ungrateful, unstable, or in trouble. My mother would hug me in front of everyone and people would praise her for still welcoming me. I had seen this pattern all my life, but this time I knew exactly how it worked. I replied to Rachel that I was fine and thanked her for telling me. I asked if she was coming to the party. She told me yes and reminded me to keep my phone charged. I then called Gerald, who confirmed the demand letter was ready, with the original documents kept safely in his office and copies stored in my binder. He would stay available by phone in case anything unexpected happened. I also called Evelyn. She was arriving separately at 6:30 with her driver and had not told my mother she was coming. The invitation had been arranged through Kyle, who had told her it was a surprise for the anniversary. Priya was already at the shelter, carrying an overnight bag and coloring books, ready to take Lily to Lake Oswego once I left. I knelt in front of Lily and held her face gently. I told her to have fun and draw something for Grandma. Lily said she would draw her house. I told her that was perfect, kissed her forehead and released her. I picked up my bag, walked out of the Maplewood shelter into the evening rain, got into my car and drove toward my parents' house with the blue binder and certified letter, feeling I had nothing more to lose. My parents' house looked bright and busy from the outside, almost like a stage set. Lights shone in every window and cars filled the driveway. Through the front window I could see people moving around with plates and glasses. A golden anniversary banner read, "Happy 35th, Diane and Robert." I sat in my car for about 90 seconds, breathing slowly and feeling the weight of the bag beside me. Then I stepped out. The front door was open. Inside I smelled cooked lasagna, garlic bread and my mother's lemon cake, the one she baked when she wanted people to admire her. Around 30 faces turned toward me. I felt the room shift the way it does when people realize the person they have been talking about has arrived. I saw pity in Aunt Mary's eyes, discomfort in Uncle Tom's posture, and a polite but forced smile from Kyle's wife, who quickly looked down at the floor. They had already heard my mother's story. They believed I was difficult and that she was trying her best. Kyle stood near the food table holding a drink and avoiding my gaze. Then my mother walked out from the kitchen wearing a cream blouse, pearls and carefully styled hair, looking like she was ready for a public performance. When she saw me, her smile paused for a fraction of a second before returning as warm and welcoming. "Serena, honey, I'm so glad you came," she said, crossing the room and hugging me. I stood still and did not hug her back. She whispered, "Behave tonight, Serena. Don't cause a scene in front of our guests." I looked her in the eye and said I would not make trouble. She released me, turned back to her guests, and then the doorbell rang. Robert opened the door, and standing in the porch light was Evelyn Hargrove, 78 years old, white-haired, wearing a cashmere coat 5 feet 3 inches tall, and very much not living in California. Diane's face turned very white, like paper, like someone who had just lost control of a situation. She whispered, "Mother." Evelyn simply said, "Surprise." The room seemed to wake up the way it does when an important elder arrives. Evelyn Hargrove was not someone people ignored. She had built a real estate business with her late husband from nothing, helped fund college scholarships for relatives, and still sent handwritten holiday cards to dozens of people each year. When she entered, people naturally straightened their posture. "Evelyn, it's been years," Aunt Mary said first, followed by Uncle Tom and other relatives I barely knew. They surrounded her with hugs and polite greetings. Evelyn returned each gesture calmly, moving through the room like someone used to being respected. I stayed near the hallway and watched my mother. Diane had not moved from the kitchen door, her hand gripping the frame while her knuckles turned pale. Evelyn walked through the guests and finally reached her. She gave Diane a light, formal hug and said, "You look well. How have things been?" Diane replied nervously, "Mom, what a surprise. I thought you were. I didn't know you were in California." Evelyn smiled and said, "I moved back to Lake Oswego last year." She turned slightly toward the group and added, "Didn't Diane tell you?" Several people looked at my mother. Diane gave a short, awkward laugh and said she must have forgotten. Robert handed Evelyn a glass of water, looking uncomfortable, like he wished he were anywhere else. She sat in an armchair near the food table, and the room naturally grew quiet around her. Then, in a casual conversational tone, Evelyn asked, "Has anyone visited Serena's house on Burwood Lane? The one I placed in her trust?" The room became quietly confused. People looked at one another, unsure how to react. Diane quickly crossed the room and said, "Mom, let's not talk about property tonight. This is a celebration." Evelyn took a slow sip of water and said, "I thought everyone already knew. I bought the house for Serena and Lily 2 years ago. A lovely 3-bedroom home on a peaceful street." She looked directly at me and asked, "Serena, have you been able to enjoy it?" Every person in the room turned their attention to me, then to Diane, then back to me. I stayed silent. The silence itself felt powerful. Diane's neck flushed red, spreading upward from her collar. Soft murmuring started as guests waited for an explanation. Diane opened her mouth, but I stood up before she could speak. "Since Grandma brought this up," I said, keeping my voice steady, "everyone here deserves to hear the truth." My heart was pounding, but I had spent 2 months living in silence at the shelter and I was ready to speak. I have never lived inside that house. I didn't even know it existed until about a week ago. The murmuring stopped. Diane stepped forward and said, "Serena, stop. You're under stress. You're confused." I looked at the room, not at her, and said, "I am not confused. I found out about the house when Grandma visited the family shelter where Lily and I have been living for the past 2 months." 30 faces froze as they listened. Aunt Mary covered her mouth in shock. Uncle Tom's jaw dropped in genuine surprise. I had always heard that expression, but seeing it happen was different. A woman from my mother's church group asked, "A shelter?" I nodded and said, "The Maplewood Family Shelter on Powell Boulevard. Lily and I have been living there since January 17th. Metal bunk beds, shared bathrooms, and simple canned soup dinners." I let the truth settle in the room. The house my grandmother placed in trust for me had been rented out by my mother for 2 years. Robert suddenly stood up from the couch and pointed at me, his face red with anger. "That's enough, Serena," he said loudly. I looked at him calmly and said, "Sit down, Dad. I'm not finished." He stayed standing but stopped speaking. My mother had rented the house using a forged lease with my name and signature. I never signed it. She collected about $52,800 in rent over 2 years and also took out a $35,000 home equity loan using fraudulent documents. All of it totaled $87,800. I said the number slowly so everyone could hear and understand. I wanted the weight of it to sit in the air. The money had been deposited into my parents' joint bank account while my daughter and I slept in a shelter, and Lily drew pictures of houses she wished she could live in. The room stayed completely still. Even the anniversary banner behind my mother looked like part of a stage set that had gone wrong. Diane's voice suddenly rose, sharp and broken, as she said, "That is a lie. Mother, tell them she is lying." Evelyn quietly placed her water glass on the table and said, "I wish she were." I reached into my bag and the room became so quiet I could hear the lasagna warming in its tray. Someone's phone buzzed once and stopped. I pulled out a white certified envelope stamped with red mail markings. I placed it on the table and said, "This is a formal demand letter prepared by Attorney Gerald Whitfield on behalf of me and the Hargrove Family Trust." I explained that it contained a certified copy of the trust deed naming me as the sole beneficiary of the Burwood Lane property, proof of the forged lease, bank records showing rent payments, HELOC fraud documents, and a notice that criminal fraud charges had been filed with the county district attorney. I spoke slowly and clearly, like reading instructions to my students. Diane stared at the envelope but did not touch it. Robert looked stunned, unable to speak. Then I pulled out one more paper and said, "This is the court order from last Thursday terminating your supplemental guardianship of Lily. Full custody has been returned to me." That was the moment my mother seemed to break. Not because of the money or the fraud, but because the guardianship control was gone. She whispered, "You can't do this. I am your mother." I looked at her standing in her pearl necklace and cream blouse beneath the anniversary banner celebrating 35 years of marriage built partly on money taken from her own granddaughter. "And I'm Lily's mother," I said. "That is the only title that matters to me now." I placed the court order on top of the envelope and stepped back. "You had 2 years to do the right thing. You had 2 years to hand me the key to that house. Instead, you let your granddaughter sleep in a shelter. So tonight, you don't get to stand here and call yourself my mother." The room did not gasp. It was worse. It simply absorbed the truth. 30 people stood quietly in a decorated living room meant for celebration, now realizing that the woman who baked the lemon cake had taken a house from her own daughter. Diane began crying loudly, the kind of crying meant to draw attention, not comfort. She pressed both hands to her chest and turned toward the guests. "You see, look what she is doing on our anniversary. After everything I sacrificed raising her." She looked at Aunt Mary, but Mary did not speak. She looked at Uncle Tom, who stared at the floor. Robert stepped forward and stood in front of Diane. "This family is falling apart because of you, Serena. You always make everything about yourself," he said. I did not answer him. Instead, I turned to Rachel, who was standing near the bookshelf with my phone in her hand. "Ari, would you read those messages out loud?" I asked. Rachel looked at the screen and read carefully and clearly, like presenting evidence. Text from Diane Mitchell, January 24th, 9:47 p.m. "Stop being dramatic. Lots of people go through hard times." The room shifted uncomfortably. Text from Diane Mitchell, February 1st, 11:12 a.m. "The answer is no. Maybe this is God telling you to be more responsible." Diane suddenly moved forward and said, "Those messages are taken out of context." Rachel continued reading. Text from Kyle Mitchell, January 28th, 8:03 a.m. "Sorry sis. We're tight right now. Mom said you should apply for Section 8. Rachel lowered the phone and asked Aunt Diane, "Were you really tight financially? Because the HELOC records show $35,000 was available in your account when you told Serena you couldn't spare $2,000. Diane turned toward Evelyn, and now the tears were real, but not from guilt. More from watching her control collapse. "Mother, please, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding." Evelyn spoke calmly. "A misunderstanding does not involve a forged signature." The lemon cake remained untouched. The tulips leaned slightly in their vase. And my mother stood alone in the middle of her anniversary party while 30 people avoided her eyes. Rachel then turned toward Kyle, who had been quiet near the wall all evening, holding a beer. "Kyle, did you know about this?" she asked. Every person looked at him. Kyle's face turned red in embarrassment. I didn't know the details. I just thought Mom was managing property for Grandma, he said. I added, the Hellick records show a $10,000 transfer to your account on June 14th for the down payment on your Tahoe, the same SUV you posted online with the caption celebrating your upgrade while telling me you couldn't help with the deposit. Kyle opened and closed his mouth without speaking. I thought it was Mom's money, he finally said. She told me it was a loan from her savings. Evelyn replied, it wasn't her money. It came from a fraudulent credit line taken against your sister's property, the same property I entrusted to you so my granddaughter would have a home. Kyle set his beer down and did not pick it up again. Then Uncle Tom finally spoke after remaining silent since the beginning. His voice sounded heavy when he spoke. Diane, I trusted you. I told people in this family that Serena was the problem, that she was ungrateful and that you were doing your best. He paused and continued, you made me a liar. Aunt Mary added, I cannot believe you stole from your own grandchild. Diane's composure finally broke, but not in sadness, only in anger. It's not stealing, she shouted. It's family money. Mother gave it to me and I managed it as I thought was right. Evelyn replied calmly and clearly, I gave that house to Serena. Then she said, in 78 years of my life, I have never felt more ashamed of my own child. The room stayed silent, holding that sentence like a shared breath. Diane looked around at the 30 people who had celebrated with her, trusted her, and listened to her story for years, but now found nothing. No support, no sympathy, no one ready to defend her. She walked down the hallway toward the bathroom and Robert followed. The door closed behind them. The anniversary banner hung crooked above the empty buffet table, one corner loose where the tape had failed and no one fixed it. I left the party quietly before cleaning began. I drove to Evelyn's house, picked up Lily from the guest room where she was sleeping, carried her to the car and fastened her seatbelt while Captain the stuffed bear sat beside her. She did not wake up. On the drive back to the shelter, the last drive I hoped I would ever make, I received 2 messages. Gerald confirmed the certified letter had been hand-delivered with witnesses present. Priya sent a photo of a drawing Lily made at Evelyn's house. A home with a yellow door and 3 small figures standing outside. I saved both. The following week, legal actions moved quickly. Gerald filed a civil lawsuit in Multnomah County Circuit Court naming Diane and Robert as defendants, accusing them of fraud, forgery, and financial conversion, and seeking full restitution of $87,800 plus legal costs. The district attorney's office officially registered the fraud complaint for first-degree forgery and financial document misuse. The bank that issued the home equity credit line froze the account after being notified of the forged application and began its own investigation. If the balance was not repaid, criminal referral was possible. Meanwhile, the tenants at Burwood Lane received a 60-day move-out notice but were treated fairly, receiving their deposit back through funds provided by Evelyn as goodwill since they were also victims of the fraud. Gerald called me on Friday and said the opposing attorney used the word untenable, legal language meaning they expected to lose. I sat on my shelter bunk and felt something new and quiet inside me, not joy yet but stability. After months of uncertainty, I finally felt ground under my feet. Gerald said the house would likely be returned to me by April, about 2 months away. I imagined Lily's swing, her crayons, and her bedroom shelves. 2 months felt possible. The call from Diane came 2 weeks after the party. She used Kyle's phone because mine was blocked. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted to hear her try. When I picked up, I heard her voice, smaller, stripped of the careful control it usually carried. Serena. Please, can we talk? She said. You have 2 minutes. Please drop the charges. We will pay you back, all of it, I promise. Your father's blood pressure is very high. I cannot sleep. The whole family has stopped speaking to us. Even Pastor Reynolds asked us not to attend service until this is resolved. She took a shaky breath and said, I am begging you. I stood in the shelter hallway under the buzzing fluorescent light. Somewhere down the corridor, a toddler laughed, the pure, carefree laughter of a child who knew nothing about money, lies, or legal trouble. I said, Mom, you had 2 years, 730 days. Every one of those days you could have called and said, Serena, there is a house. It belongs to you. Here is the key. But you chose not to. She said softly, I know. I continued, you watched me ask for $2,000 while you controlled $87,000. You told me hardship was God teaching me responsibility. You told my grandmother I was living in that house. You told people I was mentally unwell. You used Lily's guardianship to keep me quiet. There was silence. Then I said, I will not drop the charges. She said, I am your mother. Doesn't that mean anything? I answered, it meant everything once. That is why this hurts. But I am a mother too, and my daughter will never grow up wondering whether I protected her. I did not wait for her reply. You did not destroy this family. You built your story on lies. I am not ruining anything. I am just turning the lights on. I ended the call and blocked Kyle's number. Then I walked into the common room where Lily was drawing with the colored pencils Evelyn gave her. What are we drawing today? I asked, sitting beside her. Our new house, Lily said. With a swing. I picked up a green pencil and started drawing a tree beside her house. Sometimes I wondered if my mother ever truly saw me, not the version she told others about, but the real person who woke early, packed lunches, taught children, graded papers during breaks, and never asked for anything that wasn't deserved. I do not know if people like her can truly change or if they simply move on to control someone else. 4 weeks after the party, settlement talks began. Gerald explained the agreement while I sat in my car outside the school during planning period, listening through the phone as the heater slowly cooled. Diane and Robert would repay $52,800 in rent over 36 months, about $1,467 each month, into a trust-managed account. The $35,000 home equity balance would be paid to the bank within 90 days, or the bank would pursue its own legal action. Kyle would return $10,000 over 12 months at $833 per month. The criminal forgery charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, but only if restitution was completed and probation was maintained for 3 years. Any missed payment would reactivate felony charges. A strict no-contact order was issued protecting me and Lily from any communication from my parents or brother. The agreement also required them to formally abandon any claim to the Burwood Lane property. Gerald asked, "Do you accept?" I looked through my car windshield toward the school building. On the second floor I could see my classroom window, the alphabet border, the drawer of granola bars, and the reading corner where I spent afternoons teaching 22 young students. I said yes. I accepted the settlement. The following week, Robert sold the F-150 for about $28,000. Diane lost her job at the dental office after the misdemeanor fraud record became public, with the manager saying her behavior was not consistent with the practice's values. The tenants at Burwood Lane moved out on March 29th, one day before the 60-day notice deadline, and they kindly left the tire swing hanging from the oak tree. Gerald called that evening and told me the house was empty and legally mine again. I signed the final trust documents the next morning and received the key, a simple silver key that felt warm in my hand. Justice did not feel exciting or joyful. It felt correct, balanced, and settled. For the first time in more than 2 years, my life felt stable and right. On April 1st, Portland rain fell softly, the kind of rain that sounds like someone gently calming a baby. Birch trees along my street had grown fuller since the last time I stood there, their white trunks wrapped in fresh pale green leaves. I turned the key and opened the door. Inside was a small entry space with hardwood floors and a coat hook. The living room had built-in shelves and a window facing the street. The kitchen was smaller than the photo my mother once sent my grandmother, but it was real and mine. The counter, the sink window, and the view of the oak tree in the backyard. Lily ran past me and stopped in the middle of the living room, slowly turning to look around. Then she saw the swing outside and ran to the backyard shouting happily. I let her. Priya arrived about 20 minutes later with the few boxes we owned from the shelter. 3 suitcases, Lily's art supplies, Captain the stuffed bear, and the blue binder of documents that I placed carefully on the kitchen counter and decided to keep as a reminder of what we had survived. Evelyn came after that with her driver, bringing kitchen essentials like pots, plates, towels, and a kettle, along with a small vase of daffodils she set quietly on the counter. She didn't need to say anything. Lily's bedroom was the small room on the left, with shelves under the window just like the one I had seen from outside. We placed the twin bed there, arranged her colored pencils on the shelf, and I taped Lily's drawing of the house and swing above her bed. That night, for the first time in 74 days, I put my daughter to sleep in her own bedroom. I read her the fox story I invented on our first shelter night, and she fell asleep before the ending. Standing in the doorway, I listened to her breathing, No buzzing lights, no hallway noise, only rain on the roof and the quiet safety of a real home. 6 months later, in October, the birch trees turned golden, and Lily said they looked like candles. She walked to Fernwood Elementary, only 5 minutes from home, and I walked her every morning and picked her up after school. On Fridays she brought home drawings and we pinned the best ones to the refrigerator until it was covered in color. Evelyn visited every Saturday. She and Lily sat at the kitchen table drawing together. Evelyn was not a skilled artist, which made Lily laugh until she nearly fell off her chair. Lily called her she, and Evelyn called Lily my artist. Sometimes I watched them whisper and smile while I stood in the kitchen holding coffee and feeling peaceful. I began therapy in May with Dr. Kessler, who helped me understand my childhood and why I had spent years saying, "Okay, Mom," instead of protecting myself. Healing came slowly, like Portland spring, gray for a long time, then suddenly full of flowers. Diane and Robert made restitution payments on time. I checked the trust account once each month and then closed the page. They sold their house and moved into a smaller apartment on the east side. I heard this from Rachel. I felt neither victory nor sadness, just calm acceptance. Kyle sent a short message in August saying he was sorry and should have helped more. I read it but did not reply. Maybe I would one day, maybe I wouldn't. That was my decision now. One evening in October, while I graded papers, Lily asked why we had not always lived in this house. I thought carefully before answering and said sometimes it takes time to find your way home. But now we were here and we were staying. She returned to drawing. When I looked, she had drawn the house again, our house, with 3 figures standing in front. A tall one, a small one, and a shorter one with white hair and a big smile. I smiled quietly. I used to believe protecting my daughter meant keeping the family peace. Now I know it means making sure she never wonders if she deserves a home. She does. She always did. And now she has one. This is where our story rests and where our new life begins. If this story touched you, especially if you have ever had to choose between protecting yourself or protecting your child, remember that you are not alone. Choosing safety and setting boundaries is not selfish. It is strength. Thank you for staying until the end. Share your thoughts in the comments about what you would have done at that party. Another story is waiting for you in the description.